A quiet December evening in 1944. The shadows of winter stretch long across the room. Edgar Cayce, 70s, sits in his worn leather armchair, a familiar fixture in his study. His eyes, once piercing, now hold the weight of someone who's peered beyond the veil. He is the renowned sleeping prophet, but tonight he's not giving a reading. His days are numbered, and a private truth weighs heavily on his soul. Glady's 60s, his loyal secretary for over 2 decades, subtly adjusts a vintage reel-to-reel recorder hidden discreetly in the corner. This conversation is to remain strictly confidential. Not even his wife, Gertrude, or his son, Hugh, know of its existence. This isn't a psychic reading, it's a personal testament. The question that haunts Cayce isn't about politics, economics, or medicine, fields where his insights proved remarkably accurate. It's a seemingly simple yet profoundly spiritual question: what happens to the soul when the body is cremated versus traditionally buried? He's offered readings on the afterlife, reincarnation, and higher planes of existence, but this specific query, often whispered in private consultations with the bereaved, has remained unaddressed publicly. As the first stars begin to prick the Virginia Beach night sky, Cayce takes a deep breath. His consciousness expands, a familiar process, but this time it's different. He's not seeking information for others, he's exploring the mysteries his own soul needs to understand before his final transition. His voice, usually firm during readings, is a reverent whisper. There are truths, he begins, only grasped as we approach the great beyond. My life has been a conduit for souls on the other side to bring guidance and healing to this plane. But now, about to embark on my own journey home, I see with crystal clarity something I only glimpsed before. Cayce explains that, throughout his thousands of psychic readings, he's observed a consistent pattern in communications with departed spirits. Those whose bodies were cremated seemed to transition more swiftly and directly to higher planes of consciousness. It was as if the liberating fire dissolved not only the physical matter but also certain ethereal tethers that bound the soul to Earth's denser vibrations. The physical body, Cayce murmurs, is merely the temporary cocoon of the eternal butterfly we are. When that cocoon is returned to the elements through sacred fire, the soul experiences an immediate sense of release. It's like awakening from a heavy dream and finding oneself instantly at home, in the gardens of light where loved ones who've passed reside. In his altered states, Cayce has witnessed countless transitions. He describes how souls whose bodies were cremated seem to float gently toward golden spheres of light, greeted by family and spirit guides with expressions of indescribable joy. No confusion, no period of adjustment, only the jubilant recognition of finally being free from the limitations of matter. In contrast, souls whose bodies were buried often demonstrated a more gradual transition, not problematic or painful, but a process of detachment that could take weeks, months, or even years. It was as if part of their consciousness remained energetically connected to the remains, creating a need to visit the burial site or manifest more tangibly to loved ones left behind. I understand now, Cayce continues, why so many ancient spiritual traditions embraced cremation as a sacred form of release. The Hindus, who call this process mukti, or liberation, understood that fire doesn't destroy, it transforms. The physical body returns to the basic elements of creation, while the soul ascends unimpeded to continue its eternal journey. Cayce recalls a specific reading that profoundly shaped his understanding. It was for a grieving widow seeking communication with her husband, deceased 6 months prior. He'd been buried according to family tradition, but his presence lingered heavily, causing inexplicable phenomena and keeping the family in a state of emotional distress. During that reading, Cayce saw the deceased spirit wandering between worlds, unable to fully detach from earthly concerns. Not a lost soul or suffering, simply a natural process of detachment still underway. The man worried about unresolved practical matters, his wife's well-being, and properties needing attention. At that moment, Cayce sighs, I understood that cremation offers the soul an opportunity to completely release earthly ties. It's as if the sacred fire burns away not just the physical body, but also the worries and anxieties that keep us tethered to material affairs. The mystic from Virginia Beach then describes a vision from years past, now fully understood. He saw a vast temple of light where thousands of newly liberated souls danced in luminous circles, celebrating their arrival in the higher planes. All radiated a specific golden light, which Cayce now understands as the energetic signature of those who'd been cremated. It was as if they carried with them the purification of sacred fire, he explained. Their auras shone with a particular intensity, free of any residue of earthly density. They moved with absolute lightness, like dancing flames in the divine wind. Among these luminous souls, Cayce recognized spirits from different eras and cultures: Indian yogis, Egyptian priests, Native American shamans, all united by the transformative experience of cremation. They seemed to form a kind of spiritual brotherhood, assisting other souls in their journey of ascension and serving as bridges between the physical and spiritual worlds. Cayce then revealed something he had never shared, not even with his closest family. During his deepest readings, when his consciousness journeyed through the astral planes, he frequently encountered a majestic figure who identified himself as an ancient Egyptian priest. This being had become a kind of personal guide for Cayce, helping him navigate the complexities of the higher dimensions. This priest, Cayce murmured reverently, had told me about the mummification and burial rituals of ancient Egypt, explaining that they were practices intended to preserve the body for an eventual physical resurrection. But he himself had chosen cremation at the end of his last earthly incarnation, understanding that true resurrection happens in the spirit, not in the flesh. The Egyptian guide had shown Cayce how the elaborate pyramids and tombs, while impressive in their grandeur, ended up functioning as energetic anchors that kept souls bound to the earthly planes for very long periods. Many pharaohs and nobles remained consciously attached to their sarcophagi for centuries, unable to proceed in their spiritual evolution. That's when I understood, Cayce said, why Jesus, the greatest of masters, left no tomb to be venerated. His physical body was transfigured, transformed into pure light, offering humanity the supreme example of complete liberation from matter. He showed us that our true nature is spiritual, not physical. As the night deepened, Cayce began to talk about the visions he had had of his own deceased family member. His father, Leslie, had been buried according to local traditions, and Cayce could feel his frequent presence near the family grave. It wasn't a disturbing presence, but there was a quality of earthly permanence that suggested a gradual process of detachment still underway. Dad visits me regularly, Cayce admitted, especially on anniversaries and significant dates. I feel that part of him is still energetically connected to the places and people he loved in this life. It's a beautiful and comforting connection, but I also realize that it may be slowing his progression to higher levels of consciousness. In contrast, Cayce recalled a communication he had received from an old Indian friend, a sadhu he had met during his esoteric studies through correspondence. This man had been cremated on the banks of the Ganges, following the sacred traditions of his culture, and his posthumous communication had been radically different. His message reached me like a ray of pure light, Cayce described. There was no earthly nostalgia, no attachment to the places or people left behind. There was only immense gratitude and an expansion of consciousness so vast that it could hardly be translated into human words. He had become one with the universal cosmic light, maintaining his individuality, but expanding it infinitely. If you've found spiritual answers in accounts like this, consider joining our journey to continue receiving revelations that may transform your understanding of the mysteries of life and death. Cayce paused for a long moment, allowing his words to settle in the sacred silence of the room. He could feel the subtle presence of spiritual beings gathered around, as if the entire celestial hierarchy were witnessing that final confession. His eyes closed gently, and when he opened them, they shone with a light that Gladys had never seen before. There's something more, he continued, something I've only recently come to fully understand. Cremation not only frees the soul of the deceased, it also offers a sacred gift to those who remain. When we visit a grave, we are often, unknowingly, keeping the spirit of our loved one bound to the earth's vibrations through our own emotional energy. Cayce explained that excessive grieving and the compulsive need to visit graves can create etheric cords that bind the living to the dead in an unhealthy way for both parties. The deceased feels obliged to remain nearby to comfort the mourners, while the living become dependent on this presence, hindering the natural process of healing and acceptance. With cremation, he murmured, we are forced to seek connection with our loved ones on a purely spiritual level. There's no physical place to anchor our grief, so we are naturally directed inward, where true communion happens. It is in the inner gardens of the soul that we reunite with those who have departed, not in the external cemeteries of the material world. The mystic then described an extraordinary personal experience that had occurred just a few weeks earlier. During a night of deep meditation, his consciousness had been transported to what he described as a temple of transition, an interdimensional space where newly deceased souls received guidance on their next evolutionary steps. In this luminous temple, Cayce observed two distinct lines of souls. One line was composed of spirits who had undergone cremation, and they shone with an intense golden light, moving lightly toward ascension portals that would lead them to higher dimensions. The second line consisted of souls whose bodies had been buried, and although also luminous, they seemed to carry a subtle density that required a more gradual process of purification before they could proceed. There was no judgment in this difference, Cayce clarified. Both paths lead to the same ultimate destination, reunion with the divine source. But cremation offers, so to speak, a shortcut in the detachment process. It's like the difference between climbing a mountain step by step or being lifted by angel wings. In that interdimensional temple, Cayce had been introduced to a council of light beings who oversaw the transition processes. These beings explained that the choice between cremation and burial should be made based on the individual's and their family's spiritual understanding, not on social or religious conventions. For those who still fear death or cling excessively to physical forms, one of the luminous counselors told Cayce, burial may offer a gentler process of acceptance. But for souls who yearn for complete release and understand their essentially spiritual nature, cremation is the most precious gift they can give themselves. Cayce also recalled a prophetic vision he'd had about humanity's future. He saw that in the decades to come, as collective consciousness evolved and people developed a deeper understanding of their spiritual nature, cremation would become the predominant choice. Not for practical or economic reasons, but for an intuitive understanding that it represented a sacred act of release. I saw funeral temples of the future, he described, where cremation would be performed as a celebratory ceremony, not one of mourning. Entire families would gather to witness the final release of their loved one, singing hymns of gratitude as the transformative flames did their sacred work. There was joy in these ceremonies, and understanding that they were participating in a spiritual birth, not a physical death. In these visions of the future, Cayce observed that the ashes of the cremated were treated as sacred substances, often scattered in special gardens or incorporated into memorial trees that became points of meditation and spiritual connection. Families understood that their loved ones had literally become part of the surrounding nature, nurturing new life and beauty. Death, Cayce murmured, is just a word we invented to describe a transformation we don't fully understand. In reality, there is no death, only a change of form, a change of dimension, a change of vibrational frequency, and cremation honors this truth by accelerating and facilitating the natural transformation. Cayce then shared a personal revelation he'd kept secret for years. During one of his deepest psychic readings, his consciousness had traveled to the moment of his own future death. He saw himself lying in a bed, surrounded by family and friends, but his attention was completely focused on a golden light hovering near the bedroom ceiling. In that light, he said, his voice choked with emotion, I recognized the presence of all those who had passed before me and whose bodies had been given to the sacred flames. They shone with an intensity that words cannot describe, extending their hands towards me with expressions of blessing and welcome. It was as if they formed a celestial welcoming committee, ready to guide me through the final transition. In contrast, Cayce perceived that those whose bodies had been buried seemed to observe from a greater distance, still connected to him through bonds of love, but unable to approach with the same freedom and lightness. It was as if they carried with them a subtle density that kept them at slightly lower vibrational frequencies. I understood then, he continued, that my own choice had already been made. My body must be cremated, not out of rejection of the physical form that served me so well, but out of love for those I will leave behind. I want them to be certain that I have departed completely, that no part of me is bound to the earthly planes by attachment or concern. Cayce explained that he had secretly instructed his family about his wishes, leaving sealed letters that were only to be opened after his passing. In these letters, he requested not only the cremation of his body, but also specific ceremonies that honored the spiritual nature of the transition. Please, he had written in his instructions, do not make my departure an event of mourning, but a celebration of freedom, as the liberating flames do their sacred work. Sing the hymns I have always loved and read the biblical passages that speak of eternal life. Remember that I will be more alive than ever, finally free to serve in dimensions where love and healing flow without the limitations of physical form. The Virginia Beach mystic then described a final vision that had completely changed his understanding of the spiritual significance of cremation. He saw himself in a celestial garden of indescribable beauty, where every flower, every tree, every singing stream was formed by the purified spiritual essence of those who had chosen release through the sacred fire. It was as if all of paradise was built from the souls who had completed their earthly journey in a conscious and deliberate way, he marveled. There was no separation between the observer and the observed, between the lover and the beloved. We were all part of a cosmic symphony, where each individual note contributed to the perfect harmony of the whole. In this spiritual garden, Cayce encountered masters and sages from all the spiritual traditions of Earth. They all confirmed what he had discovered through his own experiences. Cremation represents a supreme act of trust in the spiritual nature of existence, a statement of faith that we are far more than our physical bodies. An ancient Tibetan master told me, Cayce recalled, that at the moment of cremation, the soul experiences something similar to what yogis call samadhi, a state of complete union with cosmic consciousness. It is as if the physical flames awaken the inner spiritual fire, instantly elevating consciousness to levels that would normally take decades of meditation to reach. This same master had explained that the Tibetan traditions of sky burial, where the body is offered to sacred vultures, function in a similar way to cremation. Both represent a conscious surrender of the physical form back to the elements, allowing the soul to completely free itself from earthly ties. As dawn broke on the horizon, Cayce felt his spiritual confession drawing to a close. He had shared the deepest secrets his soul held, offering future humanity an understanding that could revolutionize how we view death and transition. The choice between cremation or burial, he said serenely, should not be dictated by social convention, family pressure, or misunderstood religious tradition. It should be a sacred decision, made in prayer and meditation, based on the understanding that we are planning not an end, but a new beginning. Cayce encouraged open conversations with families about these matters, removing the taboo surrounding discussions of death and transition. He explained that when we consciously confront our own mortality, we paradoxically discover our essential immortality. Those who choose cremation, he concluded, are making a profound statement about the nature of reality. They are saying to the universe, I understand that I am an eternal soul temporarily clothed in physical form. When the time comes to remove this garment, I do so with gratitude and joy, knowing that my true nature remains untouched and eternal. His final words on that historic recording were a blessing for all humanity. May we live our earthly lives with the constant awareness of our spiritual nature. May we love deeply, serve generously, and depart gracefully when our mission here is complete. And may we understand that death is not the opposite of life, but its most sublime transformation, a spiritual cremation revealing the eternal flame that we always have been, are, and always will be. When the recorder was finally switched off, Gladys remained silent for several long minutes, understanding that she had witnessed something extraordinary. Edgar Cayce had offered humanity not just insights into a practical matter, but a complete philosophy on the nature of existence, transition, and the continuity of consciousness beyond physical death. It was a spiritual treasure that would remain hidden for decades, awaiting the right moment to be revealed to a world ready to receive its transformative truths.